Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. Under the Rain and Streetlights. Rain poured relentlessly onto the deserted street, each icy droplet striking Evelyn Carter's face like taunts from fate itself. She stood there, enveloped in the pitch-black night, her tattered high heels caked with mud, her tight crimson dress soaked and clinging to her body. The tiny handbag, the only thing she'd managed to grab before her Aunt Margaret threw her out, was empty, not a single penny inside. Yet Evelyn's green eyes didn't dim. They blazed with an unwavering fire, and the corner of her lips curled into a defiant smirk. "Margaret, you think this is the end of me?" "Not yet," Evelyn muttered, her voice blending with the steady patter of the rain. She tossed her wet hair back, revealing a sharp-featured face, beauty that was both alluring and fierce, impossible to look away from. At 22, Evelyn wasn't the type of girl to be weak or easily broken. She was a trap girl, smart, fair, always true to her word, but with a penchant for teasing others to keep life from getting dull. She had a bad habit of taking long baths, sometimes lingering under the hot water for an hour just to unwind. But now even that small pleasure had been stripped away. The rain showed no sign of stopping, the cold seeping deep into her bones. Evelyn glanced around. The suburban street was lifeless, save for the faint glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. The house she'd once shared with her mother now belonged to Margaret, her ruthless aunt who'd stop at nothing to claim the family's assets after her mother's death 3 months ago. Under the excuse of not wanting to feed a freeloader, Margaret had kicked her out without letting her take anything but the clothes on her back. Evelyn clenched her fists, her red-painted nails digging into her palms. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she'd never allowed herself. "Gotta find shelter first," she told herself, stepping forward in the rain. Her heels clacked against the pavement, but her stride remained confident, as if she were walking into a party. That was Evelyn's style. Seductive yet strong, rebellious yet calculated. The tight red dress, the long dangling earrings glinting despite being drenched, all of it made Evelyn Carter unmistakable. After a few hundred meters, she stopped. Her bare feet were numb from the cold. Her heels had given out somewhere along the way, abandoned when the heel snapped in the downpour. She stood under a small awning, exhaling a puff of white breath into the damp air. "If this keeps up, I'll freeze to death before I can get back at Margaret," she murmured, rummaging through her bag for anything useful. No money, no phone, just a hairpin and a nearly used-up tube of lipstick. But as she bent to pick up the fallen hairpin from the sidewalk, something glinted under the streetlight, catching her eye. A small, thin magnetic card with a stylized S logo etched on its surface. Evelyn picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "What's this?" "An access card," she wondered, her eyes lighting up. For someone like her, any opportunity was worth a shot, especially in her current situation. She wiped the rain off the card, resolving to find out where it belonged. "If I don't try, I'll never know. And if it fails, it's not like things could get worse," she thought, then kept walking, this time with a clearer purpose. A few streets away, in the upscale Silver Haven apartment building, David Knight sat alone in his penthouse on the top floor. The soft yellow glow of a desk lamp illuminated his angular face. Cold gray eyes, thin lips perpetually pressed together, and neatly combed black hair. At 28, David was a renowned billionaire, but not for generosity or social contributions. He was famous for his peculiar, innate stinginess, a trait that needed no explanation, simply a part of who he was. A man who loved saving and hated waste. He owned a string of properties, but Silver Haven was where he spent most of his time. A 20-story modern tower with gleaming reinforced glass and luxurious interiors. Oddly, Silver Haven had fewer than 10 tenants. David disliked noise, and he didn't want the hassle of managing too many people. He controlled every apartment tightly. Rent had to be paid on time, utilities were calculated to the penny, and anyone who broke his rules was evicted without mercy. To him, life was a series of equations: maximize profit, minimize cost. Tonight, David wore a plain white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, reviewing his ledger at his desk. A cold cup of coffee sat beside him, evidence he'd been at it for hours. "Mrs. Rosie's over her water limit again," he muttered, jotting it down with precise handwriting. "And Jake, what's that kid doing wasting so much paper?" His voice was flat, emotionless, more like he was reading a financial report than talking about the people in his building. But beneath his gray eyes lay an inscrutable reserve. He didn't need anyone to understand him, nor did he care to understand others. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from below. Unfamiliar footsteps. David frowned, setting his pen down. He stood and stepped onto the balcony, peering down at the street. In the rain, a small figure approached the building's gate, holding a glinting magnetic card, the one he dropped earlier that day while rushing out of a meeting, unaware it was gone. "Who's that?" he muttered, his cold eyes narrowing. Evelyn stopped in front of Silver Haven, gazing up at the towering building, its glossy glass reflecting the streetlights. She didn't know where the card would lead, but her gut told her it was a temporary escape from the rain and cold. "If I don't try, I'll freeze out here," she told herself, stepping up to the gate's card reader. She swiped the card, and with a soft beep, the gate clicked open. Evelyn grinned triumphantly. Tonight, Evelyn Carter's got a new roof over her head. Who'd have thought? She entered the lobby, her bare feet leaving wet streaks on the polished marble floor. The vast, silent space amplified the sound of water dripping from her dress. She looked up at the soaring ceiling, the crystal chandeliers sparkling overhead, and let out a low whistle. "This place is fancy. If I could claim a spot here, Margaret would die of rage," she thought, a mischievous smile curling her lips. Evelyn walked to the elevator, pressed the call button, and stepped inside when it arrived. She glanced at the card in her hand and hit the button for the top floor, number 20. "If you're gonna play, play big," she told herself, her eyes glinting with curiosity. The elevator glided up smoothly, and when the doors opened, she stepped into a plush, red-carpeted hallway with a single dark wooden door at the end. On the top floor balcony, David gripped the railing, his gaze fixed on the small figure entering the lobby below. "Who dares barge in here?" he muttered, his voice low. He had no idea that this girl, Evelyn Carter, was about to step into his life and turn everything upside down, from his natural stinginess to his cold, guarded heart. Chapter 2. A Fated Encounter. Evelyn Carter stood before the dark wooden door at the end of the 20th floor hallway in Silver Haven, the magnetic card glinting in her hand. The hallway, lined with plush red carpet, glowed faintly under dim lights that cast a warm yet mysterious ambience on the walls. She took a deep breath, wiped the remaining rainwater off the card, and swiped it across the slot beside the door. A small click sounded as the lock disengaged. Evelyn smirked triumphantly. "Too easy," she muttered, pushing the door open and stepping inside without hesitation. The penthouse beyond was vast, but its atmosphere was unexpectedly frigid. Minimalist decor in shades of gray and white dominated the space. A long sofa sat against a massive glass window overlooking the rain-soaked city, and a desk overflowed with papers. The soft yellow light from a desk lamp spilled across the walls, but it did little to dispel the pervasive emptiness. Evelyn shivered, not from the chill of the rain still clinging to her, but from the loneliness that seemed to emanate from the room. "Who lives here and turns it into a storage unit like this?" she wondered, stepping further inside, leaving wet streaks from her drenched red dress on the polished wooden floor. She hadn't had time to explore further when a low, stern voice cut through the silence from behind, making her spin around. "Who let you in here?" David Knight stood at the threshold to the balcony, his cold gray eyes fixed on Evelyn. He'd heard the strange noise from below and come to investigate, never expecting to find an intruder in his own apartment. His white shirt was slightly wrinkled, sleeves rolled up to reveal toned forearms. Yet his presence exuded authority and detachment. At 28, David was a billionaire with a chilling allure, the kind of man who inspired both admiration and unease. He despised anyone encroaching on his space, and Silver Haven was his inviolable domain. Yet here stood a stranger, soaked from head to toe, unflinching in the middle of his home. Evelyn tilted her head, sizing him up from head to toe, as if he were the one who owed her an explanation. "I'm Evelyn Carter," she replied, holding up the card and dangling it in front of him. "I found this on the street, and it opened this place. So I came in. Who are you?" "The owner." David stepped forward, snatching the card from her hand with swift precision. "This is mine. You have no right to be here," he said, his tone even but laced with menace. He instantly recognized it as the card he dropped that afternoon while rushing out of a meeting, a rare slip-up for someone as meticulous as him. "Leave now, or I'll call security." Evelyn didn't budge. She crossed her arms, her green eyes sparking with defiance. "Hold on," she said, her voice softening slightly but still tinged with mischief. "I've got nowhere to go. It's pouring out there. I'm soaked, and I just got kicked out of my house. Let me stay one night, okay?" "I won't bother you." She looked at him, attempting a pitiful expression, though the smirk tugging at her lips betrayed her sly nature. David's brow furrowed, his gray eyes unmoved. This isn't a charity hostel." "Get out," he replied firmly, pointing toward the door. To him, everything had a cost. Letting a stranger stay without any benefit was unthinkable. He turned away, intending to grab his phone from the desk and call security, but Evelyn's voice stopped him in his tracks. "Really? A fancy place like this, and it's cold as a morgue. A landlord with no shred of humanity, probably too stingy to even turn on the lights properly. If I told someone about this, say the tenants downstairs, what do you think they'd say about the master of Silver Haven?" Evelyn smirked, her tone teasing, yet sharp enough to prick his pride. David spun around, jaw clenching. She dared to threaten him. He loathed being manipulated, but her words made him pause. Silver Haven was his sanctuary, maintained to avoid trouble and cut costs, and he didn't want gossip disrupting its quiet. With his natural stinginess kicking in, a thought flashed through his mind. Kicking her out might cause more hassle, but keeping her could be useful without costing him a dime. He stood silent for a moment, arms crossed, his gaze still icy. "Fine. You want to stay? I've got a deal. You can crash here, but you'll work as my maid. Clean the floors, tidy up, do whatever I say. No pay, no complaints. Deal?" Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift, but she quickly recovered, flashing a sly grin. "A maid? Sure. I'm thorough and fair. You'll see. But fair warning, if you're too cheap, don't blame me for messing with you." She shrugged as if she'd just agreed to a fun little game. David's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but an unreadable expression. He didn't really need a maid, but this was a way to control her while leveraging her presence at no expense. "Good. Start now. Clean up the mess you made on the floor," he ordered, pointing at the wet streaks she'd tracked in from the door. Evelyn glanced at the floor, then at him. "Seriously? I just walked through the rain for an hour, and you're making me clean right now?" She feigned a sigh, but her mind was already plotting ways to tease him later. "Fine, I'll do it, but don't expect me to stay quiet while I work," she said, heading to the kitchen to grab a rag, whistling an off-key tune as she went. Time passed as Evelyn started wiping the floor, her movements careful but punctuated by muttered jabs. "What kind of billionaire is this stingy? Probably counts every drop of water I tracked in. If he knew I liked long baths, he'd faint." David heard her but didn't react, sitting back at his desk to resume his bookkeeping as if she weren't there. Yet he couldn't deny that her presence oddly lessened the emptiness of the apartment, something he'd never noticed before. As Evelyn cleaned near David's desk, she accidentally knocked a small wooden box off a shelf. It hit the floor, the lid popping open, and an old photo slid out. She bent to pick it up, intending to put it back, but her eyes lingered on the image. It was a young girl about 16, with green eyes and a radiant smile. Strangely, she looked strikingly like Evelyn, not identical but close enough to startle her. The girl's hair was longer, her face softer, but the eyes and features were almost a mirror image. "Who's this?" Evelyn murmured, looking up at David. But he was already on his feet, his face darkening. He strode over, snatched the photo from her hand, and shoved it back into the box with a swift motion. "Don't touch my things," he said, his voice like ice. But in that fleeting moment, Evelyn caught a flicker of pain in his eyes. something he quickly buried. She didn't press further, though questions flooded her mind. Who was the girl in the photo? Why did David react like that? And why did she feel an odd connection to this place? But Evelyn stayed quiet, resuming her cleaning as if nothing had happened. She knew she'd just brushed against a secret, not about his stinginess, but about a hidden depth within him. Chapter 3. The unique landlord-tenant relationship. Evelyn Carter wasn't the type to work quietly, especially not for a boss like David Knight, a cold, stingy billionaire who both irritated and amused her. The maid deal he'd offered the night she stumbled into Silver Haven wasn't a kind gesture. It was his way of exploiting her presence without spending a dime. True to her fair nature, Evelyn agreed to do the job diligently to honor her promise to stay. But that didn't mean she'd let him revel in his penny-pinching ways unchallenged. To her, this was a game. She'd excel at her task while teasing him to spice up life. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the penthouse's massive glass window as Evelyn woke up on the sofa David had grudgingly allowed her to use. She stretched, her messy hair framing her face, but her green eyes sparkled with mischief. David had left early, probably to review his ledgers or intimidate someone into paying rent, leaving a note on the table in his sharp, precise handwriting. "Clean the kitchen before I get back. Don't make a mess." Evelyn read it and smirked. "Clean the kitchen? Fine, but I'll do it my way." She stepped into the kitchen, spotless to the point of looking unused. A broom and rag sat ready on the counter, clearly David's setup to keep her busy. Evelyn began cleaning, her movements meticulous, honoring her promise of fairness. She wiped down every shelf corner, organized Old Spice containers, and swept up stray breadcrumbs. But as she worked, she couldn't resist muttering jabs. What kind of billionaire is this stingy? He probably counts every speck of dust to save on cleaning fees. She whistled an off-key tune, imagining David's scowl if he heard her. By afternoon, with the kitchen done, Evelyn decided to treat herself to a relaxing bath, her favorite habit she couldn't abandon, even without a home of her own. She entered the penthouse's luxurious bathroom, cranked the hot water to full blast, and sank into the warmth. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and nearly an hour later, she was still humming happily, lost in the steamy haze. "Life's beautiful with hot water," she sang, lathering shampoo into her hair, oblivious to time. David returned just then, hearing the steady trickle of water from the bathroom. He frowned and strode to the utility panel in the kitchen, a system he'd installed to monitor everything in the apartment. Glancing at the clock, he calculated. She'd been using hot water for almost an hour, and with current utility rates, this was no small expense. "Is she turning this place into a hot spring?" he muttered, shutting off the hot water without hesitation. To him, hot water was a precious resource, and letting someone waste it for hours was unthinkable. In the bathroom, Evelyn was mid-shampoo when the flow abruptly stopped. She blinked, staring at the shower head as if it had betrayed her. "What the hell?" she yelled, her head covered in white foam, eyes stinging from soap. Unwilling to back down, she wrapped a towel around herself and stormed out. Hair still sudsy, eyes blazing. "David Knight, why'd you cut my water?" David stood in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, gazing at her with calm indifference. "You used hot water for nearly an hour. I'm saving costs," he replied, his tone flat like a financial report. Evelyn's jaw dropped, pointing at him. "You want me to turn into a soap statue? My head's full of suds." Without waiting for a response, she marched to the table, snatched the coffee pitcher he'd filled that morning, and headed back to the bathroom. "Thanks for the water," she said with mock sweetness, then poured it over her head to rinse off the foam before stepping out again, hair wet but clean. "Done. Now I smell like your coffee. You can mop the floor yourself," she smirked, pointing at the wet trail she'd left on the wood. David stood still, staring at the puddles, his grip tightening on the empty mug. He said nothing, but his mind was already plotting retaliation. "She dared use my coffee water?" he thought, his gray eyes narrowing coldly. That night, at 10 p.m. sharp, David flipped off all the apartment's lights. His stingy ritual to save electricity. The space plunged into darkness, lit only by faint streetlight filtering through the window. Evelyn was on the sofa, flipping through an old romance novel she'd found on a shelf to pass the time. But when the lights went out, the words vanished. "What's this? You seriously turned off the power?" she shouted, tossing the book down in frustration. David emerged from his bedroom, wearing earplugs, his voice icy. "Saving electricity. Go to sleep. No more reading." Evelyn pouted, standing and crossing her arms. "Sleep? I'm not tired, and I want to read late. You're so cheap you won't let me turn on one light?" Without waiting for an answer, she started singing loudly, an off-key tune with improvised lyrics. "Oh, stingy landlord, lights off to save a dime. I'll sing for you all night. No sleep tonight." Her voice echoed through the apartment, shrill and deliberately drawn out to annoy him. She paced the living room, clapping along, turning the place into an impromptu stage. David lay in bed, shoving his earplugs deeper, but Evelyn's singing drilled through like a jackhammer. He tossed and turned, muttering, "Does she think she's a singer?" The more he tried to sleep, the less he could, and by dawn he stumbled out, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Evelyn was still wide awake on the sofa, grinning triumphantly. "Morning, boss. Sleep well?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, holding the book as if she'd read it by imagination alone. David glared at her, silent, but inwardly resolved to add a new rule to handle this cunning girl. He retreated to his room, grabbed a pen and paper, scribbled a few lines, and slapped it on the fridge. 1. No hot water after 8 p.m. 2. Fridge opens limited to 3 times a day. 3. Toilet paper counted, max 5 sheets per use. He stepped back, nodding at his handiwork, while Evelyn, reading it from afar, burst out laughing. "Counting toilet paper? You're this cheap? If I take another long bath, you'll probably lock the faucet." But she didn't protest. To her, it was just another challenge in their game. The next morning, Evelyn resumed her maid duties, mopping floors, tidying the kitchen, but didn't miss a chance to needle David. As he sat at his desk, reviewing ledgers with a steaming coffee mug beside him, Evelyn accidentally passed by, rag in hand. She faked a stumble, knocking the mug onto his papers. Coffee spilled, soaking important notes. "Oops, my hands are slippery, sorry. You clean it up," she said, shrugging with an innocent look, then walked off, leaving David with a soggy mess. David stared at the drenched papers, his grip tightening on his pen. "You did that on purpose," he said, his voice low, gray eyes following her coldly. "On purpose?" "No way, I'm just clumsy," Evelyn replied, but her sly smile gave her away. He didn't say more, silently wiping it up, but mentally notched another point for payback. He wouldn't admit it, but these clashes were starting to make the apartment less dull. The following day, Evelyn decided to explore Silver Haven to learn more about her temporary home. On the 5th floor, she met Mrs. Rosie, a frail, silver-haired woman struggling with a leaky faucet outside her apartment. "You new here? You look like that mystery girl who used to live here," she said, her voice raspy but kind. Curious, Evelyn asked about this mystery girl, but Mrs. Rosie only said she was a sweet soul who'd left long ago for unknown reasons. Evelyn knelt, fixing the faucet with her knack for small repairs. She unscrewed the pipe, tightened the joint, and stopped the leak. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Rosie said, eyes brightening. "Mr. Knight's too stingy to fix these things." Evelyn laughed. "You're right. He'd probably mourn every drop that leaks out." On the 7th floor, she met Jake, a quirky 20-something with messy hair and paint-stained clothes, sitting in the hallway, sketching an abstract piece on old paper. "I'm Jake, freelance artist," he introduced, looking up from his work. "Knight threatened to raise my rent for using too much paper." Evelyn eyed the pile of scraps beside him, then later used her meager savings to buy him a new paint set, leaving it at his door the next morning without a word. That night, David returned earlier than usual. As he went to the kitchen for water, he heard an odd noise from the hallway. Stepping onto the balcony, he looked down and saw Evelyn sneaking a bag of food to Mrs. Rosie's door. Dressed in an old hoodie, hair tied up, she moved like a thief, but a thief with a good heart. Mrs. Rosie opened her door moments later, surprised by the gift, but Evelyn had already slipped away. David stood still, his gray eyes watching silently. He said nothing, retreating inside, but Evelyn's image, the sly, teasing girl, began to shift in his mind. She wasn't just an unwilling maid or a troublemaker. There was a fair-minded kindness in her he hadn't expected. The next day, Evelyn resumed her game. While mopping the living room, she deliberately paced in front of David as he read the paper, then accidentally dropped a wet rag onto his foot. "Oops, sorry, slippery hands," she said, shrugging with a mischievous grin. David looked at her, silent, but the corner of his mouth twitched. The first hint of something like a smile she'd seen on his cold face. Their relationship, full of clashes and humor, was slowly becoming something more unique than either had anticipated. Chapter 4. A Change in Alexander and a Secret Unveiled. Alexander Knight had never imagined that a stranger like Evelyn Carter could disrupt his quiet, tightly controlled life. Since the day she entered Silver Haven with that scavenged key card, she'd brought noise, teasing, and a vibrancy he wasn't accustomed to. He was a man of cold calculation, naturally stingy, always optimizing costs and minimizing waste. Yet after just a few days with Evelyn, something unfamiliar stirred within him. Not the irritation he'd expected, but a strange pull. Each morning, Evelyn tackled her maid duties with care, true to her promise of fairness. She polished the floors to a shine, tidied the kitchen, even organized the chaotic papers on his desk, though not without quips like, "A billionaire this cheap? Bet you count every fallen hair to save on shampoo." Alexander rarely responded, watching her silently from a corner, his gray eyes betraying no emotion. But inwardly, he began to notice her integrity. She worked for her keep, never asking for more, and it caught him off guard. He was used to people trying to exploit him, but Evelyn didn't. Gradually, he found himself drawn not just to her fairness, but to her hidden kindness. He'd seen her sneak food to Mrs. Rosie, fix the old woman's faucet without fanfare, and buy paint for Jake just to ease the young artist's rent worries. These acts weren't for show. They were simply who she was, a selfless goodness that needed no reward. And that, though he wouldn't admit it, began to change Alexander naturally. One evening, as Evelyn sat on the sofa reading late, a weathered romance novel she'd found on a shelf, Alexander didn't flip off the lights at 10 p.m., as usual. He sat at his desk, pretending to review his ledgers, but his gaze occasionally flicked toward her. She looked up, surprised. "Huh, no power cut. Not saving tonight," she teased. Alexander shrugged, his tone flat. "Changed my mind. Read. Just don't sing." He returned to his papers, but the corner of his mouth twitched, a rare hint Evelyn caught instantly. She laughed. "Oh, the stingy boss has a heart now. Careful, I might demand lights every night." Another time Evelyn indulged in her usual long bath, nearly an hour under the hot water. Alexander heard the steady flow from the bathroom, but instead of cutting it off like before, stood in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, muttering, "How does she bathe that long?" Yet he did nothing. He let her enjoy the hot water, no cost calculations in mind. When Evelyn emerged, hair dripping and face glowing, she eyed him suspiciously. "Why didn't you shut it off? What's wrong with you today?" "Didn't want to mop again," he replied, his voice cool but laced with a subtle jab back. Evelyn laughed, pointing at him. "Aha, I get it. You're scared I'd steal your coffee water again, right? Don't worry, I'll spare you this time." These small shifts happened organically without fanfare, but enough for Evelyn to notice Alexander wasn't as harsh as he'd been. He was still stingy, still cold, but there were moments he let her win their teasing game, and that made him more intriguing than she'd expected. The most striking change came one morning, a few days later. Alexander sat at his desk, reviewing Silver Haven's tenant rent records. He paused at Mrs. Rosie's page, the poor elderly woman on the 5th floor, often late on rent due to her meager earnings from homemade pastries. Before, he'd how boo-you-you to send notices of rent hikes or eviction threats for prolonged delays. But this time, he recalled Evelyn sneaking food to her, fixing her faucet without asking for anything, and Mrs. Rosie's words when he'd bumped into her in the hall. "That girl's a good one, not like her stingy landlord." Alexander stared at Rosie's debt, a trivial sum compared to his wealth, but significant to her. He muttered, "Just a few $100. Worth it?" He picked up his pen, scribbled a brief note in the ledger. "Cancel Rosie's debt, this month and next." He didn't tell anyone, didn't notify Rosie, just quietly updated the records and sent the directive to the building manager. It was the first time he'd forgiven a tenant's debt without expecting anything in return. An uncalculated act, so unlike him. He wouldn't admit it, but deep down, he knew it was because of Evelyn. She'd made him see those around him differently. One afternoon, while cleaning the apartment, Evelyn spotted a small door in the living room corner. An old wooden one, locked tight, out of place among the penthouse's modern decor. Her innate curiosity flared. "What's this? Storage?" she murmured, glancing around to ensure Alexander wasn't nearby. He'd left that morning, leaving her alone with her chores. She rummaged through her bag, pulled out a hairpin, her trusty tool from the night she'd picked a convenience store lock after being evicted, and set to work on the lock. After a few minutes of fiddling, the lock clicked open with a soft clack. Evelyn pushed the door and stepped inside, startled by what she found. It was a cramped, dusty room filled with old wooden boxes and random trinkets. A small table sat in the corner, topped with a leather-bound journal yellowed with age. She picked it up, flipping open the first page with curiosity. A delicate handwritten note appeared. March 15th, Clara Knight. Evelyn frowned, turning a few more pages. The journal chronicled Clara's life, a young, kind, cheerful girl who often helped Silver Haven's tenants. She wrote about Mrs. Rosie, a little artist boy who loved painting, and her brother. Alex is always strict, but he's good at heart. But toward the end, her tone weakened. Clara described her illness, hospital days, and a final, unfinished line. "So tired today, but I'll get better." The entry stopped there, nothing more. Evelyn closed the journal, her chest heavy. The girl from the old photo she'd glimpsed, the one eerily like her, had to be Clara, Alexander's sister. She didn't know Clara had died from a serious illness, but the words revealed the loss Alexander kept buried. This wasn't why he was stingy, that was just his nature. But it was a piece of his past he shielded from everyone. Footsteps at the main door jolted her. She hurriedly set the journal back, shut the small door, but didn't relock it before Alexander walked in. He spotted her near the door, his gray eyes narrowing coldly. "What are you doing there?" he asked, his voice low. Evelyn blinked, forcing a casual tone. "Just cleaning. That door's dusty. I was going to wipe it," she said, her voice wavering slightly from being caught. Alexander stepped forward, pushed the door open, and saw the journal on the table, shifted from its original spot. He turned, his face darkening. "You opened it," he said, not a question but a statement. He snatched the journal from her, gripping it tightly. "I told you not to touch my things." Evelyn stood still, not arguing back like usual. She met his gaze, catching a flicker of pain he quickly masked. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "I didn't mean to pry. I was just curious." Alexander didn't reply. He turned, stormed into his bedroom, and slammed the door. Evelyn lingered, guilt mingling with curiosity. She wasn't kicked out as she'd feared, but his anger showed her Clara was a deep wound he wouldn't let anyone touch. That night the air felt colder than usual. Evelyn finished her bath, emerging from the bathroom with wet hair and a shivering body beneath her thin clothes. She said nothing, just sat on the sofa, pulling a blanket around herself. Alexander stepped out of his room for water but paused, his eyes landing on her. He saw her trembling, lips slightly pale from the chill, and for the first time, an odd urge stirred in him. Without a word, he went to the kitchen, grabbed a hot water bottle from a cabinet, something he rarely used to save electricity, and set it on the table in front of her. "Use it," he said, his voice cool but lacking its earlier edge. Then he returned to his room, leaving Evelyn staring at the bottle in surprise. She picked it up, pressing it to her hands for warmth, and smiled faintly. "The stingy boss cares now," she murmured, feeling a warmth beyond the bottle. It was the first time Alexander had acted without calculation, a small but clear sign he was starting to care, even if he wouldn't admit it. Chapter 5. The Threat from Evelyn's Past. Evelyn Carter had grown accustomed to life at Silver Haven. Days spent diligently working as a maid to uphold her fair deal with David Knight, playful jabs to test his stinginess, and unexpected moments like when he left her a hot water bottle on a cold night. But her past, particularly the shadow of her Aunt Margaret, never truly faded. Evelyn knew Margaret had seized her mother's estate after her death, but she never suspected the truth ran deeper than she'd imagined. One morning, as Evelyn mopped the penthouse living room floor, the doorbell rang, a rare sound in the apartment's quiet expanse. David had left early, leaving her alone with her tasks. She frowned, set the rag aside, and opened the door. There stood Margaret, her ruthless aunt with dyed blonde hair, lips painted bright red, and eyes sharp as a snake's. Dressed in an expensive, form-fitting dress and clutching a stack of documents, Margaret flashed a fake smile. "Evelyn, how are you? I heard you're scraping by here, so I came to check on you," she said, her voice sugary but dripping with intent. Evelyn crossed her arms, her green eyes glinting with wariness. "Check on me? Spare me the act. What do you want?" she asked bluntly. Margaret stepped inside uninvited, casting a dismissive glance around the apartment. "You're as stubborn as your mother, Evelyn. I'm here to help. These are papers to relinquish your claim to her estate. Sign them, and I'll give you a small sum to live on. You won't need to play maid in this dump anymore." She set the documents on the table, sliding them toward Evelyn with a smug grin. Evelyn eyed the papers, then let out a scornful laugh. "You think I'm stupid? Mom left that estate to me, not you. You kicked me out, and now you want me to give up my inheritance? Dream on." She shoved the papers back, standing tall, unflinching. Margaret's teeth clenched, her smile vanishing. "Don't play smart, Evelyn. You've got no proof. Sign, or I'll make sure you're left with nothing." She turned and stormed out, leaving her threat hanging in the air. Evelyn balled her fists, red-painted nails digging into her palms. She knew Margaret wasn't bluffing. The woman had money, connections, and no scruples about using dirty tactics to keep her mother's estate. But Evelyn wasn't one to surrender. She sank onto the sofa, thinking fast. "I need legal proof. If Mom left a will, Margaret's hiding it somewhere," she muttered. She resolved to outsmart her aunt and reclaim what was hers. The next day, Evelyn acted. She sneaked back to her old home, the one she'd been thrown out of in the rain, posing as a delivery worker to get inside. Margaret was out, leaving only an elderly maid tidying up. Evelyn used her cunning, chatting warmly to distract the woman, then slipped into Margaret's study. She rifled through drawers, hunting for any clue about her mother's will. After tense minutes, she found a sealed envelope tucked at the bottom of a drawer, a copy of the will. Scanning it, her heart raced. Her mother hadn't just left the house, but a massive inheritance. Bank accounts and company shares worth millions. Margaret had buried the truth, tossing Evelyn's scraps to throw her off. Evelyn snapped photos of the will with a phone borrowed from Jake, then returned the envelope and slipped out undetected. But she knew a copy wasn't enough. She needed the original and legal backing to beat Margaret. Back at Silver Haven, her mind buzzed with plans. "I need a lawyer and someone strong enough to face her," she thought, her gaze drifting to David's desk. That evening, when David returned, Evelyn didn't tease him as usual. She sat on the sofa, unusually serious, and called him over. "David, I need to talk," she said, her voice steady. He frowned, sitting across from her, gray eyes locking onto hers. "About what?" Evelyn laid it all out: Margaret, the will, and the massive inheritance she'd uncovered. She didn't beg, just stated facts. "I need a sharp lawyer and money to fight her. I know you're stingy, but I'm not asking for a handout. I'll pay you back double if I win. Can you help?" David sat silent, calculating. He disliked meddling in others' messes, and funding a lawsuit sounded like a risky investment. But seeing Evelyn's resolve, the trust she placed in him, stirred something in him. He stood, his voice cool as ever. "I'll handle it. But if you lose, don't expect to stay here for free." He turned toward his bedroom, adding before shutting the door, "Meet my lawyer tomorrow, 9 a.m. Evelyn blinked, stunned by his quick agreement. She smiled, murmuring, "Stingy but generous? He's not as simple as I thought." David kept his word. The next day, he took Evelyn to meet his private lawyer, a sharp, middle-aged man named Richard, an expert in inheritance disputes. Richard studied the will photos and nodded. "We've got a case, but we need the original and proof Margaret forged documents. I'll file the suit, but you'll need to face her in court. David stood by silently, but had quietly paid for a private investigator to dig up more evidence. Bank statements, shady transactions tied to Margaret, without telling Evelyn. The court date arrived swiftly. With Richard's guidance and the investigator's findings, Evelyn confronted Margaret in the courtroom. Margaret started smug, but when the original will was retrieved from her safe, thanks to the PI, and bank records showed she'd siphoned funds from Evelyn's mother's account, her face paled. The judge ruled Evelyn was the rightful heir to the entire estate, the house, bank accounts, and company shares worth millions. Margaret was ordered to return everything and faced fraud charges. Leaving the courtroom, Evelyn turned to David, who stood behind her with his usual cold expression. "I won, thank you," she said sincerely. "I'll pay you back double, like I promised." David shrugged. "No need for double. Just cover what I spent." He walked off, but Evelyn saw something. He hadn't just helped for profit, but for a reason she didn't fully grasp. That night, Evelyn sat on the penthouse sofa, gazing at the city through the vast window. She was now a millionaire, her inheritance enough for a lifetime of comfort. Yet instead of pure joy, she felt an odd attachment to Silver Haven. The days here, working for David, teasing him, getting help from him, Mrs. Rosie Jake, had become part of her. She glanced at David's desk, where he reviewed his ledgers, and smiled faintly. "I'm rich now, but why don't I want to leave?" she murmured. David looked up, as if catching her words. "What did you say?" he asked, tone flat. "Nothing," Evelyn replied, but her eyes shimmered with a new emotion, attachment to this place and to him. Chapter 6. Evelyn Leaves. Evelyn Carter sat on the sofa in Silver Haven's penthouse, her green eyes tinged with contemplation as she gazed out at the city through the vast glass window. From a girl cast out by her Aunt Margaret with nothing to her name, she'd risen to a millionaire, reclaiming her mother's massive inheritance. The old house, bank accounts, and company shares worth millions. She'd won her lawsuit, taken back everything that was hers, and by all logic, she should feel fulfilled. Yet instead of complete joy, an odd sensation welled within her, a bond with this place, with the days spent alongside David Knight, and with the man who wasn't as cold as she'd once believed. She picked up the hot water bottle on the table, left by David days ago, and pressed it to her hands, feeling the warmth spread. But it couldn't dispel the question nagging at her. "I'm rich now. I have everything. So why don't I want to leave?" She glanced at David's desk, where he sat reviewing his ledgers, his cold, focused demeanor as familiar as ever. He said nothing, but his presence in the apartment had become a comforting constant. Evelyn knew she couldn't stay forever. She was a trap girl, smart, fair, and independent. She'd promised David she'd work for her keep, and now with her fortune in hand, she had no reason to remain at Silver Haven. Staying without a clear purpose would betray her nature. What she hadn't anticipated, though, was her heart. It had begun to stir for David, despite her reluctance to admit it. The teasing, the playful banter, his quiet support during her fight with Margaret, all of it had made her see him as more than just a stingy landlord. She stood, took a deep breath, and approached his desk. He looked up, gray eyes meeting hers, silent. Evelyn rested her hands on the table, her voice calm but firm. "David, we need to talk." "About what?" he asked, setting his pen down, his tone as even as always. Evelyn held his gaze, cutting to the chase. "I'm fair, you know that. You gave me a place to stay, I worked to earn it. Now I have a home, I won the case, I'm rich. I don't need to be here anymore. I'm leaving tomorrow." She paused, watching for a reaction, but his face remained unchanged. Still cold, still unreadable. David stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. "Up to you. Just give me back the key card," he said, devoid of emotion, before returning to his ledgers as if the conversation was over. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by his indifference. She'd half expected him to say something, maybe a word to keep her, or a jab like usual, but he didn't. She forced a faint smile, hiding a flicker of disappointment. "Fine. Thanks for everything," she said, then turned to the sofa, gathering her meager belongings. a few clothes, her small handbag, and the old romance novel she hadn't finished. That night, she didn't sing off-key to tease him as she often did. She lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, a heaviness settling in her chest. She told herself leaving was right. She didn't want to depend on anyone, didn't want to stay just for vague feelings toward a man as cold as David. But as she closed her eyes, memories flooded in. Him leaving the lights on for her to read, letting her bathe for an hour without cutting the water, the hot water bottle he'd placed before her on a chilly night. "What am I doing?" she muttered, shaking her head to banish the thoughts. The next morning, Evelyn stood at the penthouse door, bag slung over her shoulder, keycard in hand. David stood a few steps away, his gray eyes fixed on her. She handed him the card, her voice soft. "Here, I'm giving it back. I'm going." She smiled, a mix of mischief and sincerity, her way of saying goodbye. David took the card, his fingers brushing hers briefly, but he said nothing. He just nodded, his voice cool. "Take care." Evelyn gave him one last look, then turned and walked out, heading to the elevator and leaving Silver Haven behind. She didn't glance back, though her steps slowed, as if waiting for something, a call, a word, but it never came. As the elevator doors closed, David stood still in the apartment, clutching the key card tightly. He stepped onto the balcony, watching the street below as Evelyn walked out of Silver Haven's main gate. Her small figure faded into the early sunlight, and for the first time in years he felt an unfamiliar emptiness. The apartment returned to its pre-Evelyn silence. No off-key singing, no water running from the bathroom, no muttered jabs at him. He wondered, why does it feel so quiet? In the days that followed, David tried to resume his normal routine, checking ledgers, tallying costs, keeping everything under control. But sitting on the sofa, where Evelyn once read, he recalled her grating songs, the times she'd spilled coffee on his papers, or stormed out of the bathroom with suds in her hair to scold him for cutting the water. Those antics had annoyed him then, but now they were vivid memories he couldn't erase. One night, he stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee pitcher she'd once used to rinse her hair. He let out a small, rare laugh, enough to realize he missed her. "She drove me crazy, so why do I want her here?" he muttered, gripping the counter. He missed the life she'd brought to Silver Haven, how she'd softened his stinginess without trying, and the playful glint in her eyes when she teased him. He wondered if maintaining his cold distance, keeping everyone at arm's length, was worth losing someone like her. But he did nothing. He didn't call her, didn't seek her out. He just stood in the empty apartment, holding the key card she'd returned, his heart heavy. He was used to solitude, used to needing no one. But for the first time, he felt truly alone. Not from a lack of people, but from her absence. Meanwhile, Evelyn had moved into her old house, the one she'd reclaimed from Margaret. The spacious, well-furnished home was now entirely hers. She had money, freedom, and everything she'd dreamed of when she was cast out into the rain. Yet each night, sitting in the lavish living room, she thought of the cramped sofa in David's penthouse, his grumbling about electricity bills, and the warmth of the hot water bottle he'd left her. She knew she had feelings for him, a vague but potent emotion she couldn't deny. But she also knew she couldn't go back just for that. She was Evelyn Carter, a self-reliant fair trap girl who didn't live off anyone. She'd fulfilled her deal with David, and now she had to live her own life. "If he didn't stop me, I can't force myself to stay," she thought, though a tinge of regret lingered. Chapter 7. A Sweet Ending. David Knight stood on the penthouse balcony of Silver Haven, gripping the keycard Evelyn Carter had returned before leaving. A week had passed since she walked out of his life, and each day the apartment felt emptier than ever. He'd once thought he craved silence, relished a tightly controlled life of cost-saving calculations. But now he realized that silence wasn't what he wanted, not without Evelyn's off-key singing, her mischievous teasing, and the vitality she'd brought to this place. He missed her, a feeling he couldn't deny, no matter how he tried to bury it beneath his cold exterior. Sleepless nights no longer came from her song, but from a stillness that kept him restless. He missed her spilling coffee on his papers, storming out of the bathroom with suds in her hair to scold him for cutting the water, and the glint in her green eyes when she smirked triumphantly. He hadn't stopped her from leaving, but now he knew he couldn't let her slip away again. The next morning, David slipped on a simple coat, grabbed his car keys, and drove to Evelyn's old house, the one she'd reclaimed from Margaret. Standing at her door, he took a deep breath and rang the bell. When Evelyn opened it, her eyes widened in surprise. She wore a loose sweater, hair tied up, looking relaxed yet retaining her signature allure. "David, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. He met her gaze, his gray eyes now flickering with rare sincerity. "I miss you," he said, his tone low but clear. "I don't want you back as a maid. I want you back because I need you." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by his blunt confession. She crossed her arms, tilting her head, trying to mask her rising emotions with her usual playfulness. "The stingy boss misses me?" "I thought you liked the quiet," she teased, though her eyes softened. David stepped closer, never breaking eye contact. "I thought so too, but you changed that. I miss your terrible singing, the way you annoyed me, and how you made that place come alive. I'm not good with words like this, but I don't want to lose you." He paused, then added quietly, "I need to tell you about Clara." Evelyn frowned, nodding, and gestured him inside. They sat on the spacious living room sofa. David held Clara's journal, something he'd brought with him, and began. "Clara was my sister. She was kind, always helping others, but she died young from a serious illness. I shut myself off because I was afraid of losing someone important again. When you touched her journal, I got angry because I didn't want anyone to see that pain. But you make me want to open up again." Evelyn listened, clutching the hem of her sweater. She hadn't expected such openness, and it stirred her heart. When he finished, she gave a faint smile, her voice gentle. "I missed you too. These days here, I've had everything: money, a house, freedom. But I missed your cramped sofa, your grumbling about electricity, and that hot water bottle you left me. I left because I didn't want to depend on anyone after getting rich. I'm independent, you know that." David looked at her, his gaze softer than ever. "I don't want you to depend on me. I want you with me, as someone I need, not a maid." He reached out, lightly touching her hand. "Come back to me, Evelyn. Let's start over." Evelyn glanced at his hand, then up at him, smiling, a mix of mischief and warmth. "Fine, but fair warning, I'll still tease you if you're too stingy." She took his hand, and for the first time, they felt a connection that needed no words. Weeks later, Evelyn returned to Silver Haven, not as a maid, but as part of David's life. Together, they dreamed up something bigger. With her vast inheritance, Evelyn proposed starting a charity called Clara's Light, using the funds to help the struggling, homeless people, tenants like Mrs. Rosie and Jake. David agreed without hesitation, contributing some of his own wealth, though he still muttered about keeping operating costs low. Evelyn laughed at that, but she knew he'd changed. He was no longer just a man of calculations. Clara's Light took off quickly, transforming Silver Haven into a warmer place. They renovated the building, fixed Mrs. Rosie's apartment, bought new art supplies for Jake, and expanded housing for those in need. David stopped rationing utilities, and Evelyn cut back on long baths to tease him less, though she occasionally sang off-key just to make him smile. One spring afternoon, a small wedding unfolded on Silver Haven's rooftop. Evelyn wore a simple yet elegant white dress, her hair loose and natural, green eyes sparkling with joy. David stood beside her in a black suit, his gray eyes warmer than ever. Mrs. Rosie and Jake served as witnesses. Rosie held Evelyn's hand, whispering, "You're so much like Clara, but happier," while Jake grinned, holding up a caricatured portrait of the couple as a wedding gift. As their vows rang out, Evelyn looked at David, smiling. "I promise to tease you for life, but I'll stay with you forever." David's lips quirked up. "I promise to ease up on the stinginess, but don't expect me to let you bathe for 2 hours." They laughed, and under the sunset, they shared their first kiss to the applause of Mrs. Rosie and Jake. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, Don't forget to hit the like button and share the story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.